The following episode might contain sensitive content that you might not be comfortable listening to. This will include topics such as self-harm, suicide, alcoholism. If any of these things or anything related might disturb you, please proceed with caution or click off the video now. What truly makes you believe that you aren't a product of your own environment? Hello, my name is Who Killed Hazy, also known just as Hazy, and welcome back to another episode of the Only Rainy Days podcast. Today, at least in the drafts, the notes, I have this episode written down as Reflection of Self, and most likely that will be the name of this episode by the time it comes out. But I want to talk about the idea of being a product of your own environment, because I feel like that is a term that people fight very harshly against. They don't like to admit or realize that to a considerable extent, if not fully, they have grown to be the same people or a mashup of the people that they grew up around. People have a very hard time accepting that topic, accepting that idea. And I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. It just depends on what traits you have picked up. But I believe it takes a very substantial active effort to become somebody that has basically dissociated from the community, the environment, the family, the little geographical location of where you grew up. It takes a very active effort over an extended period of time from an early age to make that possible. So for myself personally, I grew up with a, very warped view of reality, or my perception of the people around me was heavily diminished, to say the least about it. I spent a lot of time trying to fight it, and I think I've managed to do it to a considerable extent. But I grew up with almost a God complex, or at the very least, people were imposing a God complex upon me, and I tried my best to fight against it. Now, if anything, I'd say my God complex at times is stronger than it was when I was a young child, but at the very least now, whenever my God complex comes out, it's more of a situational thing, a more defensive tactic, as opposed to walking around just breathing, toting this very weird idea that I was just better than people, because I don't really see myself as better than most people, or at least overall. There's definitely certain fields and topics and things that I'm better than certain people at, but they might have me somewhere else, and I can completely and wholeheartedly come to terms with that. I don't see that as an issue. But when I was younger, the only thing that I was able to admit, and the only thing that everyone was in a general consensus about when it came to a comparison between me and the people around me, was Hazy's really bad at socializing. Simply put, I grew up with bad anxiety. Not terrible, not life-ruining, but I do have a lot of instances of shaking and breaking down, even crying at times at the mere thought of trying to communicate with someone. It wasn't the best, but growing up, when you're only in, elementary, middle school, whatever, only thing people really focused on was like grades, and this concept, this idea of intellect and everything like that. And I've been fortunate enough to grow up in a household that did their best to learn about how to enhance child development. So a lot went into me from literally as far as I can remember, to try to make me as smart as I could be. And it worked because I grew up with, and just to be blunt, an intellectual advantage due to the amount of resources and the amount of effort put into me since I was an infant. My parents talked about training my eyes as a child, because if you can train like an infant's eyes and their hands, then it kind of makes their brain a little bit stronger. And then the moment that I could start talking and reading, I started getting tutored in math by my older brother. So I walked into the school system just, I guess, understanding more, simply because at that young of an age, no other parents in my area was really doing that. So people would look around and they would say, Hazy's really smart. Hazy's really smart. He's the smartest kid in the grade. And all these things, all these compliments, everything like that. And I mean, it's cool to get them, but it got to a point where that's all I was known for. And then on top of that, me desperately clawing, trying to find some semblance of relatability to my peers, but realizing that all they could see me for was just my grades and how well I could do math or whatever. It created this distance that I couldn't bridge at all, because my lack of social skills on top of it made it hard for me to find any openings, any cracks in that social strategy of my peers and my teachers and everyone around me, my community. So I ended up feeling quite distant at times for both the anxiety and the image that people forced onto me that definitely warped my relationship with some of the people around me. It is what it is. I'm not going to sit here and try to act like I wish things were different. I wish they didn't try to force these type of things on me. But how the relationships ended out overall, I don't think I could actually care if things were different, because the people that saw past what they were trying to do in terms of my image, I still talk to some of them. I still talk to them. Like, the door is open. So it's all handy dandy there. But that leads me to my point. When I started to grow up and I started to, I guess, stray away from being this like super intellectually focused person, because when I got to high school, I went into high school declaring computer science. I left high school declaring an art degree. There was this big turnaround halfway through high school where I just basically stopped caring for the academics. Stopped caring. I stopped trying, really. And on top of it, I ended up transferring schools, and I left the community that I grew up in and went to a different one where they all ended up being smarter than me, which was beautiful, because now I went from, oh, here's this one kid that's insanely smart and seems to be all he's good for, to people were willing to try to figure out what I was good for by itself, because it was very clear that I couldn't help them in any form of academic sense. It was beautiful, honestly. It was a beautiful feeling to not have people look at me just for questions and things. And that's where a lot of my character development came from, was finally being able to forcefully step out of the box that people imposed onto me. But stepping out of that box and finally getting a sense of self and a sense of having control, dictation over how other people see me, view me, I realized, in hindsight 2020, the image that I finally grew for myself does not fall too far away from the people I grew up with. And even as a child, it's when I was way younger, back when this intellectual box was put onto me, I still wasn't that different. I just didn't have any way to make it come into the limelight. Anything similar to them was not focused upon. It was just this other thing that I wanted so desperately to mask. And now that it was masked, it's clear that I've fallen into some of the same things that the people I grew up around have done. Their mannerisms, the way they talk, walk. I wouldn't say dress necessarily, but even then, the way that I dress now reflects my second high school's community more so. And that concept, it's within everyone, almost. Everyone, when it comes to being a reflection of the people around you, it's just to say that you end up attaching yourself to some type of community, which is usually a community that you are a part of physically, in some sense, family, geographical location, anything of sorts. Sometimes it's on the internet now, so things have changed a bit, but for the most part, in some shape or form, a part of your personality, or even physical traits if you're into tattoos and things like that, it's all just a reflection of some type of community that you are attached to, latched to, any word or phrase that you would like to put to it. So some of the traits that I ended up latching onto from my geographical location, the people that I grew up with for the first 10, 12 years of my life, for better or for worse, I got a lot from them. Because even some of the people that I met after I transferred schools, they were from a similar area, so they had some of the same traits as well. That's where sometimes my cockiness comes from. My aggression definitely comes from the community in which I was raised in. But to dive deeper into the topic, and this is something that I grew up looking down on people was their attribution to substances. I never understood it growing up. I would look at it, and me being this quite naive kid who was relatively happy, honestly, up until about 8th grade, I couldn't understand why people would do any sort of substance. And this is back when DARE was into schools. And if you don't know what DARE is, it's just like a giant anti-drug drug prevention program that would go around to school. So they would explain all of like the hardest drugs and all those type of things. Anything that is a pill or is injected, snorted, anything like that, they would just come around, tell you exactly what it is. They would tell you what it is, all of the street names, and then it's all followed up by, well, don't do them. It's pretty bad. And I mean, they just focused on all the worst parts of the drugs. So in my head, majority of the drugs out there just got outruled immediately. It's like, why would you ever do ketamine? Like, one, injecting stuff actually makes me uncomfortable as it is, and they're mentioning all these things that makes it seem like it's just not a good time. Like, I don't understand why you would do it. Why do people smoke weed? I don't understand why people indulge in marijuana usage. Doesn't make sense to me. And the two things that I grew up definitely not understanding was alcohol usage and nicotine / tobacco, smoking cigarettes. I really didn't understand them growing up. The smoking thing, that was more just you smell terrible. What's the point? It really got that simple when I was younger. It was just, you smell really bad and you don't seem like you're functioning any differently. You just reek. I don't want to be around you. Please don't do that around me. So I didn't understand it. Alcohol usage, I've seen not the absolute worst, but I've seen the worst in people for their alcohol usage. And I grew up demonizing alcohol for it. And quite honestly, I still do demonize alcohol. But it was a different level when I was younger, because I demonized it because I would see people that I look up to or respect. They would say the worst things, do the worst things. They would lose control of their body in every sense of it. It just seemed unfeasible. You're just ruining relationships and you just look like a mess. Like, on every level, I'm just losing respect for you every time that you decide to drink. I don't want to be around you when you're like that. And that was just my view on it. Growing up, I was just like, I don't get it. I don't want it. I don't need it. Everything's cool. Until I got to high school. When I started to feel life for what it really is. Because somehow, only up until high school, that's when everything started to hit me. It's not to say nothing affected me prior to high school, but that was when I finally started to gain a understanding of prior events. So events that happened when I was about 7 or 8, they didn't hold any weight on my mental up until I got to high school. So it all hit me like a ton of bricks. And in the midst of trying to understand how can I deal with how I'm feeling, that's how I finally started to understand why people indulge in substances. Because the first time that I ever drank alcohol in any context, I was in my freshman year of high school. I remember I got back from school. I'm like down in the dumps mentally. I know exactly what some of the things were that was bothering me, but I was losing my mind for a good bit of time already. And I'm home alone. And my brain's just like, I don't know how to deal with this. I don't know how to cope. And I would see my brain start to flash back to moments where I would see people, like, they would start to yell, get angry, and then they go and they grab the bottle and they start drinking, and they seem sloppy. They say terrible things, but they would at least kind of float throughout the rest of that day. So I remember stealing some of my parents' alcohol, drinking way too much of it. Honestly, I think I almost blacked out on my first go. But I do remember there was this feeling of, I don't think euphoria is the word, but it was the first time in that little period of time in my life where I felt better, because I was numb. I drank so much that I couldn't even keep coherent thoughts, let alone actually try to speak coherent words. It wasn't possible. It wasn't possible at all. So I would just sit there in my room, just super drunk. And when I came to, aka I woke up the next day, that was definitely the day where it all made sense to me. That's where I understood, okay, this makes people forget. This is something that people go to when their mind is not a safe place. And as time has gone on, I realized that that cycle of thinking only embeds itself deeper into your head the more that you indulge in alcohol. But I'm not going to get into that. I don't want to dive too deep into that because I will at a further date. But I start to wrap it up without going too deep. That's a trait of my community that I have inherited. In the same sense, the way that I deem it, I didn't understand cigarettes and nicotine and all that. I still don't fully understand nicotine. I still hate the smell of cigarettes. That's a trait I've inherited. I didn't understand why people smoked. That's a quality I inherited. And popping pills, that is a trait that I have inherited from the people around me, because in each step of the way, with each of all these substances, I never touched them, never really had an interest in them, up until I was at my lowest, or I was at a low, and I started to look for ways out. And the people around me were doing all of these things. So as a result, if they just recommend it all willy-nilly, because I'm your friend, you're my friend, you like doing this for whatever reason, you say it makes you happy, you see I'm not happy, you say this might make you happy. I'm desperate. I'm going to take it, and I'm going to see where it leads me. And that's just, it makes me a product of my environment, because in the same way that I grew up trying to adamantly fight some of the things around me, I hated some of the substance abuse things. I hated the aggression and what people would see as toxic masculinity. I've hated a lot of traits that I would see in the people around me. When I grew up, it was still commonplace to make homophobic jokes. Wherever you went, you would just call everyone everything you didn't like, you would just call it gay, and people would just laugh, and that was just it. That the culture in which I grew up in was, looking back on it, pretty questionable, and not one that I wish I grew up in. But some of the traits from it, I took it in. In fact, I took in majority of the traits that I've seen from the people around me. And only through time have I been able to fight off some of them. And to this day, I'm still trying to fight some of the things that I've been molded into, because it's just hard. It's very hard to try to not be something that you know so well. It's very hard to try to fight something that you've been around for such an extended period of time. What do you do about it? You don't. And the younger you are, when you're exposed to this type of behavior, and it's consistent, the more likely you are that you're just going to end up following suit. You might either not know any other communities that you can turn to for more information, or by the time you do, it's too late, because you're too deep, basically. You're too deep in whatever type of community that you grew up in or have chosen to be in, and there feels like there is an escape. Or for some people, there just isn't an escape. Some people can even see the error of their ways and not change. I'm guilty as charged for that type of thing, but I continue to work for it. And if you see something in yourself that is a reflection of your community, of your community, and you don't want it to be you, you have to take the active steps to figure out what does it look like to not be that, And then how do I fight and break that and get it out of my system? I'm trying to think of a better example here. I think the best example I can think of right now off the top of my head would be my aggression. I think my aggression, it has gone up and down throughout my life. In fact, funnily enough, I recall my parents have told me that when I was about 2 or 3 years old, I got recommended to be into anger therapy. I can't remember the proper term for it to save my life right now. But basically, I grew up an angry child, or not like I'm gonna break the walls in your house type angry, but at any point that my aggression could be released for whatever reason, if I felt like I had a proper excuse, then I just let hell loose. I would just try to destroy things and just say the worst things. Like, I'm just aiming for damage. And it's going up and down. That's how people are in my community, the people I grew up with. They're people that I would classify as hotheads, because they were ready to just crash out at any moment. And I've seen it. Some people I grew up with, I wouldn't call them friends. We knew each other. We were on good terms with each other. Some of them are in jail. Some of them are dead. And that's because they get so angry, and they get lost in substance abuse, and they just crash out on the first thing that just makes it unbearable for them, whatever it might be. They get in fights, and they'll get arrested over just because of a comment that someone makes on them or something like that. And it's wrong. There needs to be help for that type of thing. There is help for it. We need to be able to actually give them the help that they need. But that was a path that I could have went down, granted, if I didn't have as much self-discipline that I do now in that sense. And the fact that I've been fighting my aggression and trying to figure out how to mellow myself out as a person and remove that trait from me, even though that was a trait that my community has practically passed down onto me. It's proof of concept to me that if you spend enough time trying to understand where the problem comes from, in this case, even who the problem might come from, you might be able to get it that specific. And then constantly trying to fight it, constantly trying to figure out, how can I remove this part from me? So in my case, I am too angry. How can I learn to dissect and diffuse situations as opposed to being the aggressor whenever I feel like someone's trying to aggress me? Because I couldn't take it at times. If someone tried to talk down on me, I just get in their face, and I get louder and louder, and I threaten people. And I lived relatively, I didn't live fearless, but whenever I started to get too angry, I was willing to just do whatever to just make my point clear, whatever it is, for better, for worse, for right or for wrong. You couldn't stop me. Now, quite honestly, if you want my secret on how to get out of aggression, this is going to sound really cliche and very not helpful. Learn to stop caring. I've grown quite lazy as a person, and being more lazy than I was has allowed me to fully figure out what battles actually need to be fought and which ones don't. Having that understanding of which battles need to be fought and which battles should be avoided, it's a pretty good way to get out of this cycle of just exerting yourself at every given turn just because you are just you're just a ball of fire just waiting to just combust and explode, and just trying to just leave your mark on everything when that's That's not the case. But that's a lesson that some of the people in my community just couldn't grasp. So I just grew up seeing all different types of examples of this. Fights, everywhere, at school, getting people following other people from school and just duking it out wherever they could. And it just goes on and on. Screaming matches, and you can find it everywhere. Screaming matches in stores, domestically, in your house, at the park, just playing basketball, whatever it is. There's just this nature of hostility that got passed down onto me. And it's not to say hostility is bad. At some point you need to learn how to be hostile and how to be aggressive and how to defend yourself. But the fact that it was so prevalent, the fact that you could find it anywhere, it was directed towards people who probably it shouldn't have been directed towards, or there was other paths, peaceful paths that could be taken. That's the reason why it's such a negative thing in my eyes. Yeah, it's a potentially good thing being abused for the wrong purposes. Just like a lot of substances, opioids and things as such, it has potential to be very positive in your life. But certain choices lead it to be one of the worst things that you could do, because there is no good feelings from aggressing someone just because you can't manage your emotions, especially aggressing someone that you care for. If you've ever just started to yell and let loose on a friend or a relative or even a teacher just because, things are going on in your life or whatever the situation might be. Maybe they pushed the boundary and they need to learn the lesson that, like, hey, you need to chill out on what you're doing. It doesn't feel good majority of the time. 9 times out of 10, yelling at someone that you care about or at least have respect for, or even to an extent someone that you just don't feel negatively about, taking out aggression on them it just doesn't feel good. It doesn't solve your problems, and in fact it probably makes more, because you could yell at your friends. Yeah, sure, you still want them to be your friends. You have to come back and apologize, and they're gonna have to remember that what you said and might have even done, it's liable for you to do it again. But at the same time, you might have experienced it, because for the people who have experienced that type of emotion, that type of problem, it's the same thing you can find probably in the people around you as well. You just might have not unleashed it in them. People are a product of their community, whatever it is. Which now we have to figure out, what do we do about it? I've already brought up one of the choices, which is trying your best to understand what traits of yourself, traits, might be multiple, whatever it might be. Identify who you are, and then once you figure out who you are, figure out why you are. Really weird question, I understand that. But for a lot of things, you can start, for basically every single part of yourself, you can start to understand where those type of feelings come from, and where do these things come from. Aggression, anxiety, depression, even just like general social capabilities, whatever it might be, you can find a source for it. And if it's something that you want to get rid of, then you need to first fully understand every part about it. Whatever it might be, you can trace it back in, even if it's a very simple trace back. So you are experiencing depression. You're experiencing depression. Well, you can either look back and find key points in your past that has led to you to feel this type of way, this general negativity, this fogged mind, this cloud that bothers you on a day-to-day basis, you might be able to figure out where that comes from, certain key events. In the same vein, you might just see that there's a general gloom over the people around you, and as a result, the lack of positive energy has just led you to become someone that is depriving these happy chemicals in your brain. And the third option, at least that comes to mind immediately, is that it's clinical. You have clinical depression, and it's not to say that it's your fault or anyone's fault, but that's just what it is. It might just be as simple as that. But the first thing you have to do is pinpoint the source or sources of these feelings. Once you pinpoint it, then you can figure out, what can I do to change? If change is what you want, whatever it might be. So if you're experiencing depression, once we figure out what it is, where it's coming from, how can we deal with it? If it's trauma based, okay, this is what happens a lot, if not basically all the time in therapy. Your therapist will try to get you to understand the full circumstances of what you understand about that scenario. And because your brain wants closure, a lot of times when your brain starts to go off the chains, when you feel like you're starting to lose control, it's because your brain, there's something about an event that has happened that you don't understand fully, or at least haven't come to terms with, and that's what's causing you to freak out. And that's why therapists are known for just being those people who ask you 1,000 more questions, because sometimes they can't tell you what happened, or they can't tell you how to feel. You just need to work through it. So you need to just take the time to think about everything as it happens. Don't worry yourself about hypotheticals and everything, which is something I might talk about. I'm thinking about it in another episode. But don't worry yourself about what could have been. That's a dangerous path, and you will forever be a worse person, quite honestly, for worrying about what could have been. You have to focus on what happened. So look back, figure out what happened, or who happened. Figure out key points, key people, key points in your life. If it's a person, is that person still in my life? Is their general presence or some of the actions that they're currently still taking a source of the sadness that I feel in my heart and in my head? Once you figure all that out, well, what does that mean necessarily? Can I keep them around and figure something else out? Do I need to create distance? Should I cut them off fully? In cases of clinical depression, should I try household remedies, such as trying to take days for myself and trying to balance my life out better in my time? Do I need to go see a psychiatrist and get diagnosed with things that I feel like I might have, or at least just ask questions about it? Do I need medication for how I'm doing, because there is just a general lack of chemicals or whatever it might be? But you have to figure out what's bothering you, or where this certain trait of yours comes from. Pinpoint it to a T, understand everything, and then work to try to find a non-destructive solution. And destruction in this context means that it will cause you harm more than good. Whatever it might be, destructive in this scenario doesn't just apply to every single person, because if you can pinpoint your source of aggression in this hypothetical sense, your source of aggression purely comes from the fact that you have a stepfather that you do not like, and his presence in your family makes your blood boil. Then you need to, if you chose to remove him from the equation, okay, kicking him out of the family, or at least just kicking him out of your life, if he's just making your life a living hell, I mean, in general sense, that is destructive because you are destroying a relationship, but it's not self-destructive. You want to avoid self-destructive means of trying to find a way to change yourself. It should feel more natural than it feels artificial. However that looks, you have full dictation to figure out how fast or how slow and what routes you want to take to make these changes. But the first thing that you have to do is acknowledge that you want to make the change. Maybe you just want to figure out where these things come from and you just don't want to change. You are okay with the certain traits that you have inherited from your community. In a general sense, that's perfectly fine as well. But by doing so, you must recognize that you are a part of your community. You are your community. You're molded by it. You grew up in it. And in that sense, continuing to submit to the community means that as time goes on, even some of the more negative traits that you have experienced or witnessed in that community that you don't see present in yourself, they might be bound to grow into you as time passes. A lot of the traits that I have inherited, I haven't seen come into fruition for myself until I've gotten older and older, even as I have distanced myself from that community. It's clear that it's embedded in me, or at least some of those traits are also embedded in the communities that I'm now in. So I still haven't changed as much. Well, I've changed, but I'm not that much different from the people that I grew up with now. We do different things, but on paper, we're pretty similar people now. But I think we've always been. It's just some of those traits have only gotten stronger. Now it becomes more apparent to me that that's who I am as a person now. But I think I'm going to change. I have high hopes for it. I understand some of the things that I don't want to say I don't like about myself, but I want to change for myself. I want to be more like my community in some senses. I think the people in my community are very outgoing. They're not shy people. They're loud people. I don't want to be loud, but I want to be more outgoing. So that's like a trade-off. That's not a trade-off, but that's how I both differ from the people in my community, and also how I want to be closer to them. And everyone, it comes and it goes. It depends on where you come from. And quite honestly, a lot of communities are very similar. As you can see, sometimes you might meet someone from a whole different area that functions just like someone you might know, if not you. There's a limited amount of characteristic traits and interests that you can have. So there's bound to be overlaps with these many people in the world, and this many people that you might potentially meet and converse with at any given point throughout your life. But there are some, in the sense that there's a lot of communities that are very similar to each other. There's a lot of communities that are very different from each other as well. So you just have to figure out what parts of the people around you do you like, which parts do you don't like, and then from those two groups, which ones would you like to make up you, and you get to change. Just the person you are today doesn't mean that's the person you are tomorrow. Nothing's written in stone. We are very fluid people when it comes to personality. So make the hard decisions and have the hard conversations. If the conversations are too hard, find someone that you can trust. In any scenario, friends, family, therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, psychologist. Talk to someone. about the changes that you want to make. Because if it's someone that you feel like you can trust, someone that you can trust, they can help you figure out how to make those changes, and it will be very helpful and very beneficial to your growth towards this person you want to be if you do so as soon as possible. Alongside, when you recognize there's a negative trait within yourself that you don't want, fighting it immediately instead of assuming that time will just make it better and time will just remove that issue from your life. Fight it now. Fight it today, fight it tomorrow, and fight it the day after, and keep fighting it until you forget that it was something that you had to fight in the first place. Because when you finally forget that that's something that you fought, that's how you know you won. It's so far gone from your memory, so far gone from your recent struggles, everything. That's how you know it's truly over, when you don't have to think about it anymore. And that goes with all sorts of triumphs over trauma or any sort of experience. When you don't think about it every single day, that's how you know it's really over. Because everything that you think about on a daily basis, nearly daily basis, that means it's probably still ongoing in some way, whether it be a legitimate ongoing event or ongoing confusions or feelings about an event that has already happened. You can think about it, whatever it might be. You could literally say, try to imagine your 5th birthday party. I'm willing to bet you haven't thought about your 5th birthday party since probably your 7th birthday party or something like that. You don't think about it. So even if something super good or super bad happened during your 5th birthday party, if you don't think about it anymore, then it's over. Really. I mean, you might feel something reminiscing about it or recalling it if if it was a negative experience. But chances are, if it's not something you think about all the time, then soon that memory will just fade away again, which means that it's over. And for better or for worse, it's a good feeling sometimes. You just don't want to forget some of the things that are important to you. But this is going to turn into a ramble, and that's not where I'm trying to go with this, because I think I've done my best to get the point across. You are not that far away from your community. Most of the time, it takes an active effort over an extended period of time to truly remove yourself from a particular characteristic or trait or interest that can be found in the community around you. All it takes is a little bit of reflection of self.